Hello, and welcome to The Game Changer, a series hosted by Kitman Labs, where we cover everything from sporting teams and sports science to cutting-edge technology.
Welcome, everybody, to the Game Changer podcast with Kitman Labs. I am Stephen Smith, the CEO of Kitman Labs. We are a sports science and analytics company helping teams to find meaning in their data to improve performance and reduce injuries. Briefly on our background, we initially started our journey within professional rugby in Ireland. I worked as a head of rehabilitation, part of the strength and conditioning and sports science team at Leinster Rugby for almost 9 years. During that period of time, we performed a huge amount of research linking all of the data we were collecting directly back to injury incidents to try and quantify injuries and reduce the number of injuries we are occurring to try and improve on-field performance. After quite a successful period of time, we spun this whole concept and idea out as a separate company called Kitman Labs, and today we work with almost 100 teams across 33 different leagues on the globe, and one of those teams we're very proud to work with is Florida State University's track and field team. And from Florida State University's track and field team, today we have Jake Schuster, who is originally from Boston in the United States, has an incredibly rich and varied background, master's in science and sports science from Loughborough University. He went on to begin his PhD research in New Zealand rugby, focusing on areas of speed and power. He also worked as a strength and conditioning coach for the Dutch Olympic Committee, performance director for Field Hockey USA, and has also worked with the renowned Eric Cressy in pro baseball. For the better part of the last year, he's been working as part of the strength and conditioning team in Florida State University. Jake, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat and share some knowledge bombs with the listeners here at the Game Changer podcast.
No, it's awesome to speak. I always like talking shop with you, Stephen. It's great that we can do it and hopefully contribute something to the field. I'm pretty stoked that you guys have started a podcast, and this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one for the last couple of weeks as well. So listen, given the fact that you have an incredible background after working across so many different sports, different countries across the world as well, what's the big difference that you notice between training and performance planning for a team versus individual discipline?
Sure. Yeah, I think skill is the biggest difference, and the need to train skill and how much time skill takes up. I'm not like an expert in sport pedagogy, but just looking at it, individual sports, there's a lot of tactical elements and management elements, but there's not the skill component that like ball sports involves. So whether it's a track sprinter or a cyclist or something like that, it's physical output is the main thing that everyone's working towards. Whereas in team sport, there's a massive skill involvement. And so physical output is just one piece of the puzzle. And, if we got everyone in our field together in a room, you'd hear a lot of stories about very weak NBA players or soccer players and so on and so forth who are superstars. And that's just the reality of our industry. So when we're doing what we do, we have to factor in that, it's one piece of the puzzle, and they have to put a lot of their time into working on their craft. Whereas in individual sports, their physical output is their craft. So the relationship with the sports staff is completely different, and what we're working towards has a much different focus.
Really interesting. So do you think from a sports science perspective, okay, individual sports, like what you're working in today, sound much purer, so it's all about the physical attributes, versus like team sports where maybe they are more skill based? Does that mean that sports science has a different contribution, or is it that it has a different level of contribution?
I guess both. That's an annoying answer, but yeah, because I think it comes back almost to my first answer, Stephen, in that say we're talking about rugby, they can go out and they can work on rugby without a massive physical output, but you can't go out and work on sprinting without it being relatively physically demanding. Even if you're just doing technical work and skipping and things like that, it's going to be demanding. And within that, I think it is a bit more top end. I think we're pushing human limits further in track and field than we are in team sports. And I know some might argue with that, but that's my observation. And when we're looking at just managing, neuromuscular readiness and things like that, and how how close we are to injury, how far we're pushing the envelope. I think the management is a lot. It gets a little bit dicier in individual sports, and in team sports, I think we can stretch people a little bit further, and they're just not as close to their limits as they might be. Whereas in track and field, someone can come in from a session totally smoked, but we have to think about what's the window of opportunity for training. And that whole fitness fatigue model that everything we do is based around gets pushed a little bit further, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I think like if you think about it from a perspective of you have somebody who may be really high risk and you're trying to potentially decrease like some of the really high intensity components of their session.
Exactly.
You can really, really easily in a rugby setting, a soccer setting, a basketball setting. But doing that, when somebody's a sprinter and their job is to run fast, it's challenging. It's different.
Yeah, exactly. You said that better than I did. There's a lot of moments when we could be precious and say, no, they won't lift today. Or we could hold our breath and say, let's get our work in, let's fill up the tank for later. And there's a lot of instances of that type of decision making in what we do here.
Yeah, I also think it sometimes that presents a huge problem too, because you have athletes who are very pure athletes like sprinters who they're running fast almost every day, and they're getting a really great stimulus from that, and they build a huge robustness. And sometimes in team sports, because of decision making, because of game after game after game and scheduling, people don't necessarily get the same exposure to the same stimulus as repetitively. So actually, like an element of deconditioning from very high intensity activities can occur really quickly. And that can be a major contributor to risk, just the fact that they aren't working hard enough.
And absolutely. You talk to people across rugby and American football, and many of them will say that their athletes lose aerobic conditioning dangerously across a season due to exactly what you just mentioned. And I think that's one of the biggest issues in team sports. It's just simple principles of overload and exposure to maximal stimuli. I think we've spoken before about our mutual belief in very high speed sprinting, very high speed running as an essential stimulus for everything in team sports.
Yeah, we have, and I think we definitely share a common belief around that. I mean, I just think that game intensity is huge, and if you wanted to be able to showcase those skills and exhibit those traits, then you have to practice it. Simple as that. So I think given that you've also worked across the globe, Europe, the US, Australia, New Zealand. Like, what are differences that you've experienced in those environments from a sports science perspective and from like a high performance perspective?
Oh, I think stereotypes exist for a reason. In Australasia, people are much more laid back and informal, and in the United States, people are a lot more polite, but not anywhere near as advanced culturally and environmentally in terms of sports science infrastructures, despite having probably a more robust strength and conditioning background than Australasia. And Europe is a bit of a mix that they've taken a lot of the Australasian models, but then they have a lot of tradition or lack of tradition around weightlifting in team sports. And that's the biggest challenge. And in Europe, I think a lot of the best work is happening in the institutions. So like EIS and places like that, Germany and Holland doing a lot of things really well. France, that there's probably, there's more money in team sports everywhere, but I think that's a little bit more prominent in Australasia sometimes. Whereas in Europe, I'd go so far as to say that the English Institute of Sport might be the best execution of what we do out there, or at least one of the best. So I think kind of where the power is the biggest thing that I notice, and where the talent goes as well. Yeah, in the States, I think we're still behind Australasia in terms of just how we structure and how we operate performance models, who has control, who makes decisions. It's not where we need to be as a field yet.
So how do you think that can progress over here? Like how if given your knowledge and coming from a background where you've spent time like across the globe, what could you bring from those other areas to try and help accelerate sports science development within the US?
I think some great people are leading the way. We've seen the likes of Bob Alejo write some really good articles just about like at least in the NCAA model, athletic director roles needing to feature people that come from, somewhere in the sports sciences. And I think education of the sports coaches is a big one. You don't know what you don't know. And I don't know how many sports coaches have been sat down and said kind of like, this is the role of your sports science and sports medicine team. This is who makes decisions. This is how you're going to reduce injuries and enhance performance. And a lot of times we just kind of try and evolve things as we go rather than, sitting down and kind of actually remodeling things. So I think just educating everyone on the model is the way forward. I think we've seen, just my observations really, I think we've seen too many cases of foreigners being brought into the States and being asked to do something that no one else around them actually wants to participate in, and that not going so well. So I think everyone has to be on board and everyone has to have a really clear picture. Americans love, myself included, to, write outlines and give PowerPoints on standard operating procedures, but I don't know how much work we actually do on trying to, person to person affect change and educate cultural evolution, if you will.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with a couple of other people as well, and that I think, hiring somebody from Europe or somebody from Australasia and parachuting them into an organization, like you say, where maybe the rest of the team isn't aligned with their goals, like they face an impossible task, incredibly challenging environment, to be brought into when you're trying to affect change. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think education of why this matters, what it's going to achieve, how will it actually be used, and how is that going to be a platform for success for an organization, and getting alignment on that is huge.
I think stakeholders anywhere, Stephen, have to take some ownership of setting people up to succeed. There's no point, even at just like a sports scientist staff member role, there's no point bringing someone talented in and not telling the head coach, here's how this person is going to help us. Here's where you should listen to them, so on and so forth. There's a lot of, we've just got to earn the trust narratives, but I think that starts from the top.
I couldn't agree more. So given that fact that you guys have made a big change at FSU as well recently, and bringing technology like ours in to assist in your processes, why can you explain to us why does data matter to you?
Sure. I think I will reiterate all the cliches. It informs decision making, being the first and foremost, but it matters to us because we need something to back up what we're seeing with our eyes. And in the instance of an athlete management system, like Kitman, which we're using at FSU, it's putting everything in one place. So you've got different pairs of eyes on different parts of campus, seeing the athletes for different purposes at different times of the day, and we need all of our inputs and outputs in one place so that we can communicate and really just function. So that's why it matters to me. But in terms of collecting data and what we do with that, again, I think we've built technology. It can do things far beyond what humans can do with their own hands and eyes, and we have to make use of that. Whether that's subjective wellness data, RPEs, or force plates, or the Nord board, which we're using. There's a lot of really exciting stuff that we can find out about how the human body is functioning and how athletes are responding to training and performance. And we have to use that to maximize training opportunities and minimize injuries.
Yeah, I was chatting with a coach recently who suggested exactly as you did, that we've created incredible things through technology and innovation that are shaping the world in all sorts of different areas. And he said to me, his reference was that Henry Ford did something amazing with cars. He doesn't walk out of his house every morning and jump up on his horse, because that would be an absolute pain in the ass. He gets out, he steps into his car, he turns on his heated seats, and he drives himself to work. And I think we're starting to see the same thing in sports science, I believe, in terms of the innovation that's happening from a technological perspective. It's just making people's lives easier, and it's really empowering. Like you say, what you see with your eyes, and it backs that up and validates that with numbers.
Exactly. And I think, your example speaks to the value of an athlete management system, Stephen. We've been collecting data for a good while as an industry, but organizing it has always escaped us. And I think it was Peter Thiel who said that if Henry Ford, was going to act like everyone else, he just would have made faster horses, right? But we have to think vertically and actually improve our systems.
So with that in mind, like, from what you guys have been doing, and you said it perfectly, we've been collecting data in this industry for years, but like outcomes and actually, changes from that, or like real value from that data has been like quite limited, if we're really honest. Like, what have you guys noticed? Any immediate changes from you guys in terms of actually using this, and what's the benefits for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, just efficiency of information. If an athlete slept very poorly 2 nights in a row, if you're really lucky, you might get, that the athlete mentioned it to one of, myself, our athletic trainers, or their events coach. By the time they get to training, maybe we've communicated to someone else, and maybe they've made a change. Whereas now, it's in there first thing in the morning. We speak about it in a group text, and we make a change, and it's planned well in advance. We've caught things before they've slipped through, and maybe we just prevented an injury, or maybe we've created an opportunity to train harder the next day. But either way, it's just information is being used, whereas it might just be floating in the universe otherwise. Also about training opportunities for me, that's a big one. And I remember, when Andy Shelton came on campus to help us onboard this, and the natural bias, the natural concern was, is this going to make us soft? Is this going to make us train less? And Andy's saying, most of the decisions made off of load monitoring is to train harder. And that's what we've done. We have a couple of athletes who, they really don't like being sore in season. Most athletes don't really like being sore in season. And it's always a journey finding opportunities for these athletes to train hard. And, a couple of weeks ago, we saw that one of our star sprinters she was feeling good. She was happy in the new semester, and things were going well. And we had a conversation. We said, this athlete is going to lift hard today, even though that wasn't in the plans. And that athlete went out and ran the second fastest time in the country that weekend, because we knew that she was fine and she was flying and she had plenty of time to recover. But we never would have done that without the information that we had.
That's enormous. That's absolutely massive. And I think that bias you spoke about in terms of, people believing that, this is going to tell me to hold people back. As Andy like rightly said, the majority of times with teams that we work with, we find that they end up pushing their athletes harder. And actually, prior to the introduction of a system like ours, actually all of the data that they have is being used just to hold people back, because they don't actually really know what it means. They haven't been able to link it with injuries. They don't know which risk factors are meaningful or not. And they actually have too much data, so they're over decisioning. So, I mean, hearing a story like that that's enormous for us, because that's exactly how we want to support people like you.
It's hugely valuable, Stephen.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear it. It's working. So, compared with many other elite teams, like colleges definitely operate in in smaller settings, offering different levels of resources for staff and athletes. Like, how do systems like this help to support you day to day in that environment, and give you do they give you the tools that you should have in a professional environment? Do they enhance or extenuate or amplify essentially what you guys deliver in terms of product to your athletes?
That's a tough one. I probably should have asked for some clarification before we got online, Stephen, because it is a smaller setting in terms of staff and resources and like how many pairs of hands we have. But for me, it feels bigger because we're not all necessarily under the same roof you might be with, say, a rugby team. And like we'll be running across campus doing different things. And like about half of the support staff are not only with track and field. And, I'll be running around, I'll be helping out with tennis, I'll be helping out with soccer, what have you. So I'm not like under the roof able to just help and make decisions all day. So simply, again, that information being in the palm of my hand, where we can communicate and make decisions, is just massively valuable.
So have the mobile applications and tools that allow you to, basically bring it on the move with you rather than have to carry a laptop around. Have they been huge for you in that environment?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'll often walk home for lunch or something. It's kind of my only moments of peace during a work day. And I'll just, if we haven't already made decisions for training based on, early in the morning, I'll take a second look at things then and just, send some texts through the track coach or to the ATC, and it's done right there.
So tell me about, the differences or what you've experienced with the varying types of athletes that you're now working with as well. Like, you work with a lot of young athletes versus more mature athletes, like people who are straight into college. Like, how have they responded, or how have the varying degrees of how they've responded across age profile? What's that meant for you guys?
Responded to training or responded to using Kitman?
Yeah, to like integrating with a technology, like from a cultural perspective, like has it been easier with younger athletes or older athletes, or what has buy-in been like across them all?
Gotcha. I would say I don't see a big correlation with age, or even training age. I'd say the correlation is entirely with how professional the athlete behaves across the board.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, you might be able to draw some stereotypes. Like I'm fine saying this publicly because I give them crap publicly. Like the Islanders are a challenge with any kind of structure, but that's part of their culture. I'm sure if we had Germans, they would struggle being creative if we asked them to be, right? And that's fine. I'm sure I'll anger some people with that, but like it's a reality. So I know that if I'm building out any new protocol with anything I do, that I have to pay extra attention or follow up extra with all of our Islanders. And that's just part of how you work in sports. But generally across the board, the ones who want to succeed are completely on point and don't need to be asked twice.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's quite cool as well to be able to see that. Okay, well, different types of people are going to need different things from you as a coach, and technology doesn't have to dissipate that; it can actually enhance that, and maybe that know that you're going to use it to do that, but you can still then go and push on people and communicate people in different ways, and use the soft skills and use the coaching skills that you've built up and the human interaction skills to actually to get exactly what you need.
Well, everything we do is about facilitating the success of others and of the team, right? So, if an Islander is not going to have it in their head every morning when they wake up to do something, and they just do better when they have their coach remind them to do something every day, that's fine. That's my job to remind them, and that's just part of what we do.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm thinking back to my days in rugby. There were certain athletes who would, reach out to you for what they need, and there are certain athletes who you have to sit on. And like you
Yeah.
say, that was our job. You learn that, you learn how to deal with people, and then you learn how to be the best coach that you can be for them.
Yeah, none of them are better or worse. They're just different.
Well, 100%. So, listen. Lastly, I think this has been great. I've really enjoyed this. But lastly, just given that, and listen, we met at a conference a number of months ago, and you presented on strength, speed, and plyos, and it was really fascinating for me to see the level of detail that you've gone into. Given your interest in that, like, can you talk a little bit about how you're harnessing data to explore relationship, between strength, speed, plyos, and in terms of like speed development, and how you're applying them in training and in competition?
Sure. Well, our men's sprints coach, Rick Argro, pointed out to me that every touchdown in the National Football Championship game the other weekend was scored by someone who was a high school track and field athlete. And I think they were all like standouts. And so what does that tell us? That sprinting and jumping is very good for athletic performance. So I think we either overthink this stuff or we don't know what we're doing, so we replace what we should be doing with circus acts in some way, shape, or form. And there's plenty to talk about, agility ladders and things like that. But even beyond that, I think there's a lot of drills that we see in team sports that are not that useful, or simply are never going to be as useful as sprinting and jumping. And I think the best thing that we can do to be fast is to run very fast and practice that. And same goes for multi-directional running, and same goes for jumping. So for me, the essential element for speed in team sports or in any sport is exposure to very, very high velocities, be it on your own or assisted speed or overspeed work, which I think is a fantastic tool. I think the Eastern philosophies, or Near Eastern, all the Soviet stuff that you can read out there on plyometrics is really interesting. Whether it's Bednarchuk or someone else, like I really love drop jumps and depth drops. Cool as a kind of catch-all, but I think, yeah, I wish I had a broader answer, but I just think sprinting and jumping is really effective. There's certainly a lot to be said for practicing small motor tasks. So like I'm thinking of a single stepping task. Definitely use a lot of stuff from Franz Bosch. I've learned a lot from him. Giving athletes the opportunity to practice a single step with a variety of constraints, I think, can be extremely useful. I think coordination has a huge role in both injury prevention and sports performance. But I think at the end of the day, anything we do should be just thought of as complementary to these maximal stimuli, these exposure to sprinting and jumping.
Amazing. And I am looking forward to seeing you at the next conference when you're presenting on that stuff, because with the level of detail that you've gone into and the research that you've done there, truly is amazing. Jake Schuster, you are most certainly a game changer. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really, really appreciate the insights that you're willing to share with us.
No, thank you, Stephen, and thanks to Kitman Labs. Absolutely love what you guys do, and we're really happy to be a client.
Thank you so much.